Let's introduce the gentleman who's going to take us through to the next part of our discussion. We do have Peter Amanga in the house this morning. Peter, how are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm happy to be here again.
Happy to see you. So let's introduce your story. Now, the story, the Teacher Service Commissioner has directed both primary and secondary school teachers to report back to learning institutions by Monday next week, ahead of an eventual reopening of schools. TSC Chief Executive Officer Nancy Macharia has said teachers can report any day between now and Monday and start preparing schools. Now, the proposed plan to reopen schools is now being opposed in court. So the question for you this morning is, should schools reopen or not? Peter, I want to start from there. Let's get your sentiments on that.
Schools are not ready for reopening. And teachers, teachers teach. They don't teach empty desks. They don't teach doors. They don't teach classrooms. They teach students. You put students in school first, then send teachers there. But this situation where we are being told teachers to be in school and there are no students to be taught, are we saying teachers are going to slash the grass or to wipe or to fumigate the place? What we are saying is we are not ready. And what government is doing is just trying to play this kind of thing to show that we are busy, we are trying to get ready. Teachers don't teach empty desks. So, and we have said, parents, schools have not received funding from government. I am a BOM chairman of a school here in Nairobi. Our accounts in the school where I am the BOM chair are nil. No money has arrived in those schools as of now. And again, our schools have gone through a lot of problems in terms of the private schools in this country. Some have been sold, some are under auction. So we are simply saying government should have opened up other sectors of the economy first before talking about reopening schools. Let the economy pick to pay fees. We all know that thing called free secondary school and free primary school is a mirage. Let nobody, those are fake news from the Ministry of Education. There is nothing like free learning. So parents are right. They don't have money. Magoha can tell us and say that there is free education. That is not true. I am a BOM chair. I've been a teacher for 25 years. I know that person in public schools. And I can tell you, without money, no public school in this country can run.
Fantastic.
We are not ready.
Mr. Munga, I'm going to come to you shortly. Let me just pick the thoughts of Tommy Randall on that as well. I mean, if you look at the way in which we got the announcements from the Ministry of Education, and in particular the CS, Magoha, there hasn't been a clear footing. Even as we talk about now this morning, Tommy, we still do not have the dates. What we've been told is that, yes, it might be possible for us to see kids and universities reopen as from the 5th of October. I mean, when you judge it from where you're sitting this morning, does it make sense policy-wise for us to start thinking about going to school now?
It's not. It was a very good idea for the person who went to court so that they can issue an injunction and delay, giving people more time to get ready. Also, what Amunga suggested, give the economy more time to open up so that people have money in their pockets to be able to deal with the expenses that come with going back to school, as well as the issues where private schools are financially in trouble, will give them a little bit more time to recover.
Pretty much. All right, Mr. Munga, I want to come back to you therefore. Let's look at that plan. I mean, we did know that the 2020 academic calendar was scrapped off, as we do know of it, before we got these new announcements about the new plans from the Ministry of Education. Good. Now they're saying, well, candidates have to get back fast. That's the plan. And then the rest of them will follow them a week later. If we are reopening, why can't we all just reopen at once?
Yes, that would be the best suggestion. Okay, the minister told us yesterday that let's not speculate. He told us only teachers are reporting. So he told us the calendars that we have may be fake, that maybe they're better calendars. But this is what I wanted to say, my brother. The truth of the matter is this. Kenyans, as of now, and Kenyan schools and Kenyan parents are simply saying, you don't ambush us. We are people who have gone to school. We are enlightened as Kenyans. Give us good time, talk to us, tell us why you want to open schools, and we'll know what to do. But if you just ambush us one morning, take your children to school, we may not be able to do it. We'll have a problem.
Pretty much, Peter Munga. Tommy Randall, thank you very much for putting in your sentiments. And guess what, Mr. Munga? We do know that as from the 25th, the National COVID-19 Response Committee is going to make a ruling on that. Guess what? I shall be calling you back so we can talk about it.
What?
Fantastic. Let's now
wait
move
for that
on
time.
to the next issue that we have for you this morning. Now, the National Treasury has dispelled fears that the country is facing debt distress. Now, National Treasury CS Ukur Yatani has said the country's debts are highly sustainable, adding that the country is moving toward longer-term concessional debt. Fine. That has been the plan. Now, CS Yatani says this shortly after signing a 1.9 billion shillings warrant from the government of Japan. Now, Japan was represented at the signing ceremony by Japan's ambassador to Kenya, Ambassador Roichi Hore. Let's leave it there. Now, I want to bring in you, George, this morning, just before we cross over to Alex Ndegwa this morning, also joining us to weigh in on this issue of debt and matters to do with government collections. Now, first off, George, are we debt secure, as Yatani is indicating?
Elijah, debt is. I think it's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time, depending on how you use that debt. Let me just give you a background of some of the statistics that we can refer to as you discuss this subject. Some major economies, I want to refer to Japan itself, who is lending to us around 2 billion as a debt to GDP ratio, what we call a debt to GDP ratio of 238%. Singapore has a debt to GDP ratio of 112%. South Africa down here has a debt to GDP ratio of around 56.7%. And then we have Egypt 90.5%, and then Ghana 57.3%. Closer home, that is in the East African region, we have Kenya at 60.1% currently. Remember, last year by close of 2019, December 2019, we were at 57.1. We are currently at 60.1. Uganda is 38.6, and then Rwanda is at 40.2. My challenge with our debt portfolio is the exponential growth of our debt portfolio between 2013 to date. Remember, we inherited a debt portfolio around 1 trillion shillings. We are now going to 6 trillion shillings as we speak today. So if you look at the quantum growth year on year, then you can project and see that we might reach our debt ceiling, the 9 trillion, before end of next year. That is my biggest worry. My other biggest worry is, where does this debt go to? And if you look at our books, the books of Treasury, you'll find that a bigger percentage of this debt go towards recurrent expenditure and not development expenditure. And when you put debt into recurrent expenditure, then it means that it is not supporting GDP growth or economic growth as it were. Therefore, it might reach a point where you are not able to pay off your debt, because most of the monies that you picked went into paying your day-to-day expenditure and not development expenditure. So our percentages are still good, as the attorney puts it. But my biggest problem is our year-on-year growth in our debt portfolio. How does it, if you project it in the next 3-4 years, where are we likely to be? And then second bit is, where has our debt gone into? Has it gone into development, or has it gone into recurrent? And I can tell you certainty that almost 70% of the debt we have accumulated over this period has gone into recurrent expenditure, Elijah.
Fantastic. Now, George, I just want us to therefore look at this data that we are reflecting this morning in terms of how our debt, both public and domestic debt in total, has been really on an upward trend, as we also prepare Yatani's Bite, just as we usher in Alex Ndegwa also to weigh in on that. And if you look at our government debt, if you really look at it properly, then we'll actually see that we have been on an upward trajectory. Fine. My question to you, George, as Alex also gets ready to actually jump in on that, is it's not bad for us to have a rise in debt because that will also point to the growth of the economy. So the question is, why but? So the but is exactly what I want you to answer for me this morning, which is also going to take us to Yatani's bite on exactly what he thinks Kenya is doing now and why he says, we have never defaulted on any loan. Let's take a look at that bite.
For the last 1 year, we've slightly more than a year, Kenya has never borrowed any commercial loan because we know the danger, the high interest rate, the shorter, maturity, and the pressure that's going to put on our exchequer to facilitate, to service it. So what we've done over the last 1 year, when we borrow concessionally, and we borrow from the multilateral and friendly bilateral countries. Whether most of the time the interest rate is at 1%, with a longer repayment period of even up to 30 years. This is really important because in a situation that we are being faced with at the moment, with to some extent revenue falling behind our projections, and given the challenge of COVID and the desire to continue maintaining highest standard of service to the Kenyan people, we, as a responsible country, we have the leeway to borrow. And Kenya has never defaulted on any loan. In history, Kenya has never defaulted. Our friends will tell you, all countries, how...
That is Yatanis saying, well, we've never defaulted on any loan. Now, Alex, I want to bring you in on this morning, and let's weigh in on that. Now, if Kenya's borrowing now is projected, if you go by what we have been borrowing, it is projected to be at 2.6 billion shillings a day. Total debt ceiling, which will touch 9 trillion in 2022. That's what Yatani is actually putting it at. And if the national debt is also projected to increase by 750 billion in the next 10 months, which is equivalent to, again, 2.6 billion a day. So let's talk about the increase that we've seen from June last year to where we are right now. It has increased by 15%. Are we staring at a crisis for the next government that is coming in, if at all this debt ceiling is going to get there by 2022? Alex, I don't know whether you can get me. All right, as we try and sort out Alex audio. George, is it a crisis for the next president who's coming in, if at all our debt ceiling is going to touch 9 trillion by 2022?
Day, and already we are at 6 trillion going into 6 point something. I project that from where I sit, that we're likely to hit the 9 trillion by 2021 last quarter or 2022. So come the new government, we are likely to, the first agenda of parliament would likely to increase our debt ceiling. My problem with our debt portfolio, as I've said before, is the exponential growth year on year that is not commensurate with our GDP growth. Our debt portfolio, we are growing our debt portfolio at over 10% year on year, yet our GDP growth is at between 4 and 5%. If we are growing our debt portfolio at, say, 10%, but our GDP is growing at 15-20%, I would not have a problem with that at all, because then you are able to pay off your debt as from your revenue collections within your economy. But when you don't do that, then there's a challenge that you might reach somewhere and you get to where you get to a burnout or riot, where you cannot collect enough money to go into your debt repayment. Remember, currently the statistics is that almost 60% of our debt repayment. If it 70%, then I can bet you that everything that we collect might go into debt payment. That means that we can only survive by taking more debt. That is what landed Greece into where they are today. They are trying to get out of it, but that is what landed them into where they are, because they accumulated so much debt that was not commensurate with their GDP growth, and it reached a point where they could not now pay their debts as it were. And when those debts, when those taps are closed, then the economy cannot survive, Elijah.
All right, George, just because of time, I want us to jump into the next issue, which is actually now pegged with whatever it is that we're talking about this morning. Has to Alex, I don't know whether you're back. Can you get me now?
I can hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can get you. I want you to also jump in on that issue. And remember, I asked you just before we had that technical hitch, is if therefore that the debt ceiling gets to 9 trillion now by 2022. Are we saying that for the next government that is coming in, they are staring at a crisis in terms of how much they can borrow?
I mean, from the numbers that we are seeing, we really can't see the ordinary revenue actually matching up to the amount of debt that we are accumulating. But again, I think the question of whether public debt is sustainable is quite an academic exercise. And I think last year the World Economic Forum actually pointed it out, that it's very difficult to determine whether public debt in a particular country is sustainable. I love the numbers that George brought up. And I think the World Economic Forum had said they still are trying to understand why Japan would accumulate, a debt to GDP ratio of about 200+% and not default on their obligations. While you have a country like Ukraine, which defaulted on certain obligations, well, their debt to GDP ratio was only 30%. So then the question of my worry is our ordinary revenue going to match up with the amount of debt that we are accumulating? Now, I think a few days ago, the Treasury published their budget review outlook paper, which was a bit deviated from what they published earlier in the year, the budget policy statement, where at first I think we expected to have a GDP growth of 5% plus going forward. And now this year we've completely revised that down to 2%. Now, in terms of the amount of debt that we are taking, looking at the numbers that were just released a few days ago, is that for this year, we had actually projected to only take about 163 billion in terms of domestic financing. Now, that has been revised to 500+ billion. That will go to 600 and almost to 700 billion in 2022. And that's considered that's an election year. Now, in terms of optimism about economic growth, I think the Treasury is overly optimistic, because they're saying that they think that the economy is going to rebound to about 5.2% GDP growth in 2021. Now, my biggest worry again is our ordinary revenue matching up to the amount of debt that we are collecting. Just maybe quickly, just to wind this up. If we look at the recurrent expenditure for the previous year, our recurrent expenditure increased from 1.48 trillion to 1.6 trillion. Yet our ordinary revenue was 1.57 trillion. Now, the Public Finance Act is very clear that any loans that Kenya takes should only go. It should not be spent on recurrent expenditure. Yet, looking at these particular numbers, it seems to me that the Treasury, contrary to the Public Finance Management Act, could probably be using the debts that we are accumulating to actually pay for recurrent expenditure. But I love what the Treasury is doing. I think Yatani has been very clear that the major goal of this administration now and of the National Treasury is what we call fiscal consolidation. How do we reduce our debt, and at the same time, how do we enhance mobilization measures?
All right, gentlemen, I just want us to leave it there, because even the next issue, I just want us to talk about it together, because we're still going to talk about that. Now, the Kenya Revenue Authority will now post some of their staff to bigger manufacturers' factories to monitor their operations closely. In regulations that were tabled in Parliament, manufacturers of excise tax-covered goods such as beer, wines and spirits, cigarettes, mineral water, soft drinks, juices, and airtime will have to provide, wait for it, office space for KRA staff at their premises. Now, Excise Duty Regulations 2020 states that the Commissioner may, for the purpose of ensuring proper excise control, require a licensee to provide suitable accommodation and equipment in a factory for the authorized officer responsible for excise control at the factory. I'm going to leave it there. Gentlemen, in line with what we are talking about this morning, what is KRA trying to achieve with this move and its excise duty had to regulate and monitor going by this latest move? George, I want to bring you in shortly as we wait for Alex to also come in and contribute on this issue this morning.
Elijah, if you look at our 2019-2020 budget and the revenue targets that were given to KRA, you realize that they missed the revenue budgets by around 200 billion. That's a huge amount, a huge amount to miss your targets with. And then you look at their budgets for this year, that is 2020-2021. They have a budget of 1.89 trillion to raise. And with COVID having come in, and you remember when we discussed economic stimulus program 1 that gave a lot of tax breaks in the economy, that essentially means that KRA might not be able to meet their 1.89 trillion budget for this financial year by a huge margin. That is why the taxman is moving in very strongly to try and collect as much as they can from the tax the tax head that they have. Remember that the main tax head that KRA relies on to raise its budget is income tax, that's corporation tax, and then we have pay as you earn, and then we have value added tax, and then we have excise tax. Value added tax and excise tax are very easy to collect because you collect them at source. VAT has been easy for KRA because they just look at your sales and determine how much VAT you're supposed to pay. Excise tax has been a challenge to KRA. One, because of avoidance by most players in that industry, or by under declaration by players in that industry. You remember the case that KRA had with Karachi breweries the other time. Excise tax was one of the taxes that were being mentioned. So I think KRA is just moving in to try and seal these revenue loss loopholes so that it can collect as much as it can to meet its budget. Probably this time around we might miss our revenue targets by more than 200 billion come June 2021. So I think KRA is just trying to move in into the market as fast as it can, so that it can collect as much as it can within the period that it has been given. And considering that this is a big area that it's been losing revenue year on year from the players in that space, Elijah.
All right, Alex, I want to also get your contribution on that now. If you look at what KRA is doing by actually making some of the staff sit at these bigger offices, what are they trying to say? Are they trying to say that when it comes to excise duty, or let me just talk about tax in general, that the biggest challenge is tax evasion?
It's been estimated that tax evasion actually amounts to about 6% deficit, or creates about 6% deficit in our budget. And I think maybe just I need to point out to George that the recent budget review paper has actually revised down the targets of collections for this year, and that should be about 1.6 trillion, which I think is still overly optimistic, because the tax cuts that we did in April, the Treasury has estimated that is going to cost us about 170 billion. They've done away with a lot of incentives. We really haven't expanded our tax base, although I think from January with the digital services tax, the minimum tax, which is going to really net in a lot of turnover, might probably seal that loop. But in terms of, we're accumulating a lot of debt, just from our previous conversation. A lot of the money in our budget is really going to go to debt service. And remembering that these are the last 2 years, even the current government is completely trying to leave a particular legacy. And how governments in Kenya leave a legacy is through development expenditure. So that they're really going to try and collect as much money as possible to fund the development expenditure and also to keep up with the recurrent expenditure. Now, as to excise duty has been quite a tough nut to crack for KRA. And that's because there's a lot of illicit and counterfeit goods in the market. I think last year, one of the KRA commissioners from the excise duty department actually said that 78% of the players in the water bottling sector actually do not pay any excise duty. So then, of course, KRA has really tried to curb in on this. They introduced the accessible goods management system in 2017, which I believe Okiya Omtata went to court on, the usual public participation element, and they were thrown out. And now these draft regulations are back and now being considered. But as to the question of putting officers inside these buildings, I think there are going to be a few questions. Number one, who is going to cover the cost of the fit where these officers are going to be sitting? And number two, we have to think about privacy. How do we ensure that the KRA officers only get the information and only use that information that they get in those factories only for the purpose of enforcing the excise duty collections? So, but I think it remains to be seen how it's going to be implemented, and I expect a lot of cases filed in the High Court with respect to this.
Pretty much. Tommy, I just want you to give us your sentiments on that before we take a tiny break as well. From a policy perspective, is it a good move from KRA?
It seems sound on paper, but on different, because even at the New York Stock Exchange, they have compliance officers, but yet still there was a subprime crisis that happened right under their noses. So, and also it brings up a good issue in terms of privacy. What are they going to do? That information to somebody else, give somebody else a competitive advantage.
Tommy, also, just 15 seconds before we go on a break. I mean, if Mburu's biggest challenge for his short tenure in the office has been, well, I've identified where the loopholes are, is in compliance, don't you think that also now, having people sitting in the office also raises that question of, are they going to be swayed not to comply? If you really want to make people pay, would you rather have people watching them from inside or from outside?
From him, if that's what it takes for him to meet his target revenues, then that's fine. And this Tax Procedure Act gives him that authority to do so. Also, I read somewhere where they would be looking at the water bills that companies pay, using third-party information as a way of trying to gauge whether you are actually paying what you're supposed to pay or whether you are evading taxes.
Pretty much. I want to go back to George as well this morning. Now, George, if you look at the 2 months of the official financial year for 2020, 2021, you will see that KRA has actually missed their targets as well. Talk to me about that. Do you think that now that they're going to actually meet their targets this year, well, Mburu is quite upbeat, and by how far back are they going to fall or likely to fall? All right, we seem to have lost our gentleman this morning. That's what happens when you're working online. All right, we take that short break here on Business Hour.